Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our next episode where we have a very special guest who will be sharing all things intermittent fasting and talking all things metabolic health with us, Dr. Bishara. Before we jump into our topic of today, let me tell you the reason why we are doing this live interview series where we have a special guest from our functional integrative medicine world who wants to share his or her wisdom with you. We know there are so many chronic diseases out there, which many of us are struggling. Many of us are managing it, barely managing it. So going beyond that and talking disease reversal, disease prevention is on our agenda. It's on our goal today. And that's the reason we are doing this. So my guest today is Dr. Bishara, who is an internal medicine specialist in New York City. And she is a founder of From Within Medical, a medical wellness practice that places emphasis on mind, body, and gut-brain axis to prevent and manage disease. And with over 20 years of clinical experience, time and time again, Dr. Bishara has discovered that the connection between the systems within us is such a delicate balance, and it plays a significant role in disease prevention as well as management. But she feels that it has not been addressed enough. So with her multidimensional and personalized unique approach, she has helped hundreds of patients get well and reverse conditions. And so we have her here to share her wisdom with all of us. Welcome, Dr. Bishara.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I know you are very much passionate about intermittent fasting, and there is so much buzz going around, some true, some not. So we would like to share and learn from you and get clinical pulse such that people can, our listeners can achieve better metabolic health going through intermittent fasting. But before we jump into our topic, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your journey, what you do, and how you ended up doing what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and why I am. But interestingly enough, intermittent fasting is actually something that was part of my weight loss journey as an obese teenager. Way back when, I won't give away my age, but a while ago, over 30 years ago. And it wasn't trendy at the time. A lot of people didn't know it. And I kind of just stumbled upon it, kind of just through trial and error. And this is really why I'm so passionate about nutritional medicine and nutrition in general, and how what we eat really plays a role in our health, our immune health, especially. But also just our overall mental and cognitive function as well. And I'd love to talk a little bit about all of that. But my background is in internal medicine. I was a practicing internist for many years, traditional internal medicine, which I love. But what I found was that I really didn't have the time to discuss nutritional-based approaches to my patients as much as I would like. And so that's really where my medical practice, my wellness practice was born. And I focus on gut health because I do believe that gut health is the forefront of medicine and chronic illnesses. And I think we're going to see an emerging emphasis in the next few years on the huge role that gut health plays in our overall health. And, you know, my colleagues and I even found a huge link between gut health and COVID as well. So I definitely think gut health is very important. And so we can talk about how intermittent fasting plays a role in that. And overall health. But yes, I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting. And as I mentioned, I was an obese teenager, started to go on a diet, and I found that I was losing weight, but I wanted to eat a little bit more because I was doing that specific strict, you know, like 1,200 calories to lose the weight at the time. And so I kind of just started playing around a little bit and said, what if I can eat a little bit more? Not a lot more, but a little bit more. I was starting to like experiment with 1,600 calories, and I found that I was still losing weight, but only if I restricted the time period. And so I started to lose weight, and I lost a total of 80 pounds at the time. Yeah. And so I managed to keep it off through my form of intermittent fasting. And then it wasn't until I went to medical school where I started studying biochemistry, and it really kind of came together as to why that worked.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, our body is amazingly equipped with all these survival mechanisms, and intermittent fasting does work to help you lose weight, but it also has all these wonderful benefits as well.
Wow. So you discovered your form of intermittent fasting by just self-experimentation, and you knew it worked. But when you went to medical school, that's when you connected the dots, that the reason why it worked.
Exactly. I remember studying, it was like the light bulb went off. I'm studying in biochemistry the process of gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis, and we can talk a little bit about that. I also have an article written about all of these in a kind of layman terms so people can understand it. But those are really why intermittent fasting works so well, is because your body is you feed your body with food, right? And that food is converted into glucose, which fuels our cells. But our cells are so smart, and our bodies are so smart and built really for survival, that if we're not eating, right, if like we don't have access to food, which in 2022 is not really a problem, but back in the day, thousands of years ago, when people did not have access to food all the time, they had to rely on secondary sources, right? So those secondary sources include, most people don't even realize this, our liver has a storage of glucose in the form of something called glycogen, which it stores kind of for that rainy day, right? There's about 1,200 calories of glycogen stored. So when you're not eating, what your body does is it shifts into this, I call it like plan A, B, and C. It shifts into plan B, which is to burn that glycogen to fuel its cells, right? And so that kind of starts the whole process of the amazing effects of intermittent fasting. And then, believe it or not, when your body runs out of that glycogen that's stored in the liver, it still has to survive, because what if you're not eating for 12, 18 hours, sometimes 24 hours? It has to kick into another survival mode. And that's where it goes to the fat, right? So then it's like, I really need to still fuel my cells. And this is where we get that term ketosis, right? There, everybody's talking about ketosis, and I want to be in ketosis because that burns fat. Well, your body goes into ketosis after a certain number of fasting hours, because it doesn't have a choice but to burn fat to feed its cells. And so this is really that concept of intermittent fasting that is so healthy, because those two mechanisms start this cascade of really beneficial health effects, which include weight loss, which everybody wants if they're dieting, but also these amazing immune health benefits as well. So so that's really where and we can talk a little bit more detail about that as well.
Awesome. So that's intermittent fasting. If we narrow it down, yes, we can look at benefits in terms of metabolic health, but it's not just limited to that. From what you're saying, it's such a delicate balance where it will affect your immune health. It will affect your gut health. And as you can optimize all together, everything together, it just means so much more wellness and getting to your goals quickly and easily.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of just briefly described how it helps with weight loss, right? Where we're finally kicking gear into burning fat. And fat burning mode is ketosis. And then we feed ourselves with ketone bodies. But that ketosis and ketone bodies is actually such a better fuel for our cells, especially our brain cells. So brain cells do much better on ketones than on glucose. And I always say the fuel for our cells from ketosis is like the difference between going to the gas station and getting regular unleaded fuel, which is glucose from food, or getting ketosis, right, which is like premium fuel for our cells. It's so much better for our cells. So number one, it helps with brain health. Number two, it helps with immune health, because this is what actually happens when you're fasting. So if you think about fasting, what's going on is your cells always need fuel. But if you're not eating to provide that fuel through glucose, your cells have to find another way of getting fuel.
Exactly.
So your body almost kicks into, I call it like low power mode, like on your phone, how you like preserve the battery, right, for like important function. Well, your body does the same thing. It has to kind of preserve its energy to focus on fueling its cells, right? Brain comes first. So what it does is it kicks into something called autophagy. So what does autophagy do? So autophagy is this process where your body starts to look at its cells, and we have lifespan of cells. All our cells die eventually. Usually it's about 90 to 120 days. So our body starts to look at older cells and say, you know what? I really need to conserve energy. I don't want to feed those older cells. They're not doing as much for me as like a brand new, great cell. So our body starts to spring clean in a way where it starts to get rid of old cells that it's not needed, because it's preserving that energy that we have in autophagy to fuel just the great cells, the newer cells. So what happens as a result of that in terms of immune health? Well, cells that might be dysfunctional, cells that might, be possibly converting into cancer cells, all of these dysfunctional cells are killed off during fasting. Wow. So that's one great benefit. But there's also a great benefit for gut health as well, if you think about it. We all need sleep, right? We all need to rest our bodies. Well, our gut needs rest too. So if we're constantly eating, what's going on is our gut microbiome has to work, and our gut has to digest, and it has to nutrients, and there's so many other functions going on. And if it's doing this on a 24/7 basis, or even like, people are eating from morning till, right before they sleep, your gut's really not getting that time of rest that it needs, because it does have to perform other functions. So when we fast, we're giving that time of rest to our gut. So if you think about people who have like inflammatory bowel disease, like what do they do when they're in a flare or they have a bad flare up? They give them bowel rest. They put them in PO, right? To give your body that rest. So that's another really good benefit of intermittent fasting: gut health, brain health, immune health.
Wow. 3 in 1. What's there not to like?
Exactly.
Awesome. So what form of intermittent fasting? I know you discovered your own form of intermittent fasting that worked for you. So why don't you start by sharing that? And there are so many forms available. So that has left people even more confusing as to, okay, should I do 16:8 or 18:6? So just talk to different forms and what worked for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have this outlined very easily in the blog article that I have on my website. Sure. So it's also a good resource, but I can kind of briefly talk about it. So the 16-hour, the 18-hour, all those hour ones that everybody talks about, that's called restricted time eating. That's one type of fasting. And before I kind of describe everything, I really feel like intermittent fasting is for the most part pretty safe for most people. But anyone that's starting an intermittent fasting journey really should make sure that it's okay with their doctor, because there are certain conditions that you really shouldn't be doing fasting with, like if you're underweight, or certain conditions like uncontrolled diabetes mellitus also. But for the most part, I actually think it works really well for diabetics. It's certain people you really need to kind of adjust your body to it. That being said, so there's a restricted time eating, which is you're restricting the time period of what you eat in the day. So for example, you can restrict the time of eating to either 6 or 8 hours in the day. And the reason why 6 and 8 hours are the most commonly done is because studies have shown that we kick into that glycogen burning mode in the liver, usually around like 9 to 10 hours of not eating. So after you haven't eaten for 9 to 10 hours, your body's like, okay, what's going on? I need food. I need fuel, right? Your body doesn't care how it gets fuel. It just wants to survive. So what happens is your insulin levels drop after about 9 to 10 hours, and your body alerts you because it wants to feed its cells. It alerts you by making you hungry. So this is where a lot of people, they're like, I can't do intermittent fasting because I'm really hungry. And I tell them that hunger is actually your body kicking into fasting mode if it needs to. So that hunger is when your insulin levels drop. But what happens is if your insulin levels drop and you don't eat, right, your body has to decide it's going to go into that plan B that we talked about. So what it does then is it starts to stimulate the release of another hormone called glucagon. So glucagon is like the opposite of insulin. When insulin's up, glucagon's down, and vice versa. Glucagon will actually start that process of stimulating that glycogen burning mode that we talked about in the liver. So this is where we really start those benefits that we talked about. So that's where restricted time eating falls into place. So 6 to 8 hours, you eat during a 6 or 8 hour period. during the day. That's restricted time eating. Then there's alternate day fasts. So you can alternate. So usually what you do there is you fast for 24 hours from so for example, if your last meal the night before was at 7 p.m., you will fast for a full 24-hour period until the next day at 7 p.m. And then at that time, you'll have 500 calories. So you're fasting for 24 hours, right? And then you can either do that on an alternate day basis where you fast for 24 hours and you eat normally for 24 hours, or there's another type which is called the 5-2. So there's alternate day or 5-2. And the 5-2 is you eat normally for 5 days and then you fast for 2 consecutive days. And those 2 consecutive days are 24 hours as well. And then you eat a 500-calorie meal for those 2 days. And then the following 5 days, you're eating normally. And I want to stress normally because normally to some people might be 3,000 to 4,000 calories, and you're not going to lose weight from that. Yeah. So the whole goal of intermittent fasting is to obviously achieve the health benefits. And if you want to lose weight, yes, but it's also not a free-for-all to just eat everything.
Exactly.
Yes. So those are really the main types. There's also prolonged fasting, which some people will do, like a water fast for many days. I personally don't recommend really doing a water fast for more than 48 hours, only because you start to lose muscle at that point. So it's not a good idea to just do it. There are some like long-term fasting kits out there that have been shown and like scientifically studied, like Prolon is one of them that I actually will do. And that's a very structured, and it's been studied, and they do give you food. So that's considered a long-term fast, and it's a 5-day fast, which I like. But other than that, I don't recommend for people to kind of just go into their own.
Do it on their own.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah. If they are under medical supervision, great. But
yes, exactly.
Not by themselves.
No, not by themselves. There are some other types of like juice fasts. Again, those are something that should be really highly controlled under a medical setting, and not something that you just do on your own because, you have to wait for next weekend's wedding or whatever. So
yes. And I love that you touched on the point that just because you're doing intermittent fasting, it's not free food when you are eating, right? So that I feel like is the mistake that many people make, is when they're eating, they just like, okay, I'm going to fast for next 16 hours. So now it's meal time. So they just binge eat, they eat a lot. So things that they would not normally also eat, right? So
yeah.
I feel like if that is understood, like if they understand how this is going to benefit them, hopefully they'll not make that mistake of eating whatever they want when they're given a chance to.
Exactly. And that's actually a really good point, which kind of, I know you're like an advocate of this too, is really the type of food that you're eating makes a difference. And we can kind of touch on that a little bit in terms of how that's related to our gut microbiome. So if you're eating food that's processed and doesn't have a lot of fiber or protein and a lot of refined carbs, well, what's happening is you're actually feeding like bad gut bacteria in your gut, because there's a ratio of good and bad gut bacteria. Obviously, we want the ratio to be higher of good bacteria than bad, right? And we know there's certain strains that are beneficial for our immune system. But what happens is when you're eating all these processed foods and just refined carbs, you're actually, it's almost like you're creating a monster in your gut. That gut bacteria like wants more of it. And so it shuts off the satiety center in your brain, and you're constantly feeding, and you just always feel hungry. Whereas on the converse side, if you're eating healthy fiber, right? So that's plant-based foods. And I'm not 100% plant-based, but I recommend for people to do at least 70% plant-based and a little bit of animal protein if that's what they want. But studies have shown that the prebiotic fibers in plant-based foods are really what help us to maintain a fast where you're not starving, right? And then the next day you're rebounding. And why is that? Well, the reason is that the fibers in plant-based foods are not they're not digestible by our body, so they have to come out of our stool. But during the transit time, the process of them going into your colon, your good gut bacteria actually feed off of them, and they create these wonderful byproducts to support our gut lining. And those byproducts are released, and there's signals sent to the brain that say, hey, you know what, we're very satisfied. You don't need to feed us anymore. The appetite center is turned off. And there's a very intricate metabolic pathway that, you know, this involves, and I'm not going to get into that, but this is real science. I mean, you're shutting off these satiety centers from these prebiotic byproducts, right, of our gut bacteria. They're called short chain fatty acids or postbiotics, and they actually help to not only keep our gut healthy, but they also help to send those signals to our brain, right? So that's what we want to eat when we're fasting, because that'll ensure that we're successful and we're full, right? You want to eat, exactly. You want to be nourished, but you also want to be full and not hungry the next day, right?
Exactly. No, and I love that you emphasize that point that fiber is the fuel. So make sure you're eating a lot of fiber in terms of plant, and we know that fiber is coming only from plant-based food. So yes. No matter what diet you follow, whether it's paleo or keto, no matter what diet you are following, just make sure 70% of what you are eating is coming from plant-based sources, and then you should be good to go, because there is no one diet that works for all. So just stick to what works for you, but just make sure that you are getting plant-based foods 70% of the time, and then you are ahead of the game, ahead of all chronic diseases.
Yeah, and again, you bring up a really good point about you know, we're all unique individuals with different DNA, and I am a big believer in customized diets, meaning a diet that might work for me might not be the best for you, right? And so it really depends on what your needs are, what your DNA is. I mean, there are people with a lot of allergies that can't have specific foods. So it's something that you really should work with a holistic nutritionist or a functional medicine doctor to really kind of come down and figure out what is it about a specific diet that's going to work for me. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it isn't like a one size fits all.
Fits all, yes, exactly. And so I know so many people are trying different forms of intermittent fasting, like you said, but I feel like so many people, they struggle with where they get hungry a lot, right?
Yeah.
So what tip would you give to them? That I know you explained the science behind it and how that hunger will come, but it's going to kick in the satiety hormone. So the science is well understood, but how can we help them by giving them a clinical tip or a clinical pearl such that then they can overcome that hunger signal?
Yeah. Well, so first and foremost is introducing the fiber, right? Because we know that the fiber will kind of shut off those centers, but there are a lot of other factors that play a role. And I always say your body's not craving food, it's craving nutrients. So when you're deficient in certain things, your body will do whatever it needs to do to try to replenish. So, and this is why I incorporate like a gut brain assessment in my all my wellness evaluations, because I'll give you an example. If you're deficient in serotonin, for example, which a lot of people might be if they're not eating foods that are rich in its precursor called tryptophan. So if you're deficient in tryptophan, which is the precursor for serotonin, meaning we have to have tryptophan in order to make serotonin. And guess what else? Tryptophan is not even made in our body. It's an essential amino acid that we have to obtain from an outside source. So if you're not obtaining enough tryptophan to make serotonin, well, we know what serotonin does. Everybody does, right? It helps with mood. It helps with actually helping us to fall asleep as well. And so if we're deficient, we're going to start feeling a little sluggish. We're going to start feeling, you know, a little depressed. And so what does our body do? It's going to try to figure out a way to replenish serotonin. So you will crave nutrients, right? Sometimes we'll eat the wrong food to try to replenish, because your body doesn't know the difference between, you know, like healthy and not, like we do, because we're educated and we know. But you want to eat foods that are rich in tryptophan, like bananas, soy, pineapple, walnuts are amazingly rich in tryptophan. Then when you're eating all these foods, then your body's able to make more serotonin and actually make melatonin too, because melatonin's precursor is also tryptophan. So that's one way that you can replenish. So once your body starts making enough, it's not going to feel hungry anymore. There's so many different factors, really. And this is why it's so important to really kind of see someone who is informed about all these things. And then once you replenish the nutrients and you make those postbiotic byproducts that shut off the brain center, over time, you'll start not to feel hungry. The other thing is your body, everything in life is habits, right? So if you're used to eating breakfast every day, you're going to wake up and want breakfast, right? Your body knows that you're going to feed it glucose. But say you decide you're going to do an intermittent fast, and in the morning you wake up and you're really hungry, because that's what your body knows, right? It just knows you feed me in the morning when you wake up. Well, if you start fasting and you start not eating, the first few hours of the day, your body is really trying, because it's trying to survive.
Right.
But if you teach your body a new habit, which is, hey, you know what, I'm going to fast these few hours, you're going to have to figure out another way to fuel cells. Well, then your body's smart and it says, okay, this has been, a couple of days now where she's not feeding me in the morning. This is starting to become a pattern, right? And so after 3 or 4 weeks, your body recognizes that this is now a pattern. I need to go into plan B mode. So then your body adjusts. So then you're not feeling hungry anymore. So I've been doing intermittent fasting for so many years, and I usually don't eat late at night. So around, 5 or so is usually my last meal. I don't feel hungry anymore. Sometimes if I, if I do feel hungry, I don't eat. And then, believe it or not, in the morning when you wake up, like you might go to sleep hungry, in the morning you wake up and you're not hungry anymore. Well, why are you not hungry anymore? You were starving the night before, right?
Right.
Well, the reason why you're not hungry in the morning is because your body kicked into those secondary modes and it provided fuel. So, and a lot of people say, but it's not working out with me. I'm still really hungry. Well, but you haven't done it long enough. So if you stay the course, 3 to 4 weeks is usually when it takes time to get adjusted. Yeah. And do you do intermittent fasting too?
I do in the form, I do a circadian rhythm fasting, as to I don't eat after sunset. So it's sunrise to sunset is what I eat. And so that's my form of intermittent fasting that I just found is practically possible for me and my family. Because that way we can stick to it forever.
Absolutely. And that's really what we want to do, is just make a lifestyle change. We don't want to torture ourselves, right?
Exactly.
I like that circadian rhythm. So how many hours do you usually do? Like how many
hours? So 10 hours. I'm eating for 10 hours and fasting for the rest. So 14 hours fast every day.
And that's actually good. Like 10 hours is good for maintaining. And some people actually can lose weight on 10 hours. So it really depends on what you want to do.
Right.
But yeah. Great. Yeah.
No, that works. And I know that is just awesome information, doctor. And I forgot to touch base on one point, which I want to go back to what we had starting at the discussion, is the calorie in, calorie out approach, because I know that is so prevalent. And I think most of us, when we start, that is where we are hung up on. And so many of them are still doing it to this day. So can you just touch point a little bit on your insights on that approach and why we should not just get hung up, and why should you do a different approach?
Sure. And when I put patients on like a weight loss protocol, I will not start off with them counting calories. We kind of see, because I don't want people so focused on counting calories, because then what happens is you become obsessed with like a specific number. Where I want people more to focus on eating those healthy fibers that we talked about. And if you're eating and fasting, so I'll just give you an example. If you're fasting, say for 8 hours, right? You should be having, your meal should be 70% plant-based. So if you look at a plate, right? 70% of the portions on that plate should be some kind of plant-based food. And then 30% other. So you can have some kind of carbohydrate or protein. If you're following that and you're eating 2 meals or 2 meals and a snack, you won't need to count calories, because, unless your satiety center is completely shut, your body will feel full from those foods and you won't necessarily have to count calories. There are certain instances where I will have people count calories, just because sometimes they're eating more and they're used to eating more. But yes, intermittent fasting does work, but you still do need to watch your intake. It's not a free fast for all during a 6 or 8 hour period. It's eating healthy, but not having to worry about counting little things. But the goal is to eat healthy, and get those benefits. So, like I personally, I'm someone who counts calories all the time, just because I've been so used to counting them. But I don't focus on them so much, and I try to eat healthy. But it's kind of a trial and error. So I'll see how somebody responds to, the plant-based portions and the specific diet that I see is recommended for them, based on their nutritional protocol, their gut-brain assessment, but also what their body is used to. And then from there, then we kind of adjust and see, do we need to start counting calories or not? But usually I don't recommend counting calories. And, a point that you had made also is for women, sometimes women are a little obsessed with counting calories versus men. Men can get away with eating more calories. It's just, unfortunately, they have more muscle mass, and they can get away with eating more, and, they lose weight quicker with intermittent fasting. So I see a lot of couples that start intermittent fasting, and then the wife gets, a little discouraged because the husband's losing much faster. Well, he's got more muscle mass, and he probably can use a little more calories. So, eventually, and, we have hormonal issues too, that, we women tend to store fat because our bodies are thinking, well, what if she is going to get pregnant or whatever, I need to store. So it's all a lot of survival mechanisms. So it does work for both males and females. It's just a little bit different. And, there needs to be a little bit of adjustment, but yeah, so.
Awesome. No, and that really touches the point that it's just, this is not just only for men or not only for women. It works for all, but just make sure you're doing it right. Maybe take help when you begin with, and just do it right. And I also like the point where you mentioned that calorie counting, if you go beyond that, you'll be looking at nutrient counting. I would say, if you go for that, you'll take your health to the next level, along with intermittent fasting. So I love all of that approaches combined, and we can achieve better metabolic health. So I know we touched on different aspects, doctor, but at the end, I just wanted to understand from you, diabetic patients, yes, they need to do it under medical supervision because they have a different problem, but there are so many pre-diabetics out there who want to make sure that their metabolic health improves, and they can definitely make sure, if they are not on any medication, they can make intermittent fasting part of their lifestyle and use it to their benefit. So if anyone was to start now and they are still confused, what is the easiest form that you would recommend anyone who is pre-diabetic and wants to start it?
Yeah, and I kind of want to just clarify that I think intermittent fasting is great for people who are pre-diabetic or have insulin resistance because of the fact that it does work well with them. I'm talking more about like diabetics that are, insulin prone or just unstable glucose levels. Those are the ones that should monitor. But everyone that wants to start on a fasting protocol, talk to your doctor about it. I would say don't start at 6 or 8 hours. Start at 14 hours and see how you do. Fast for 14 hours in the day, and then kind of cut it down to 12 after a week, and see how you respond. Because again, it's all teaching your body a new habit, right?
New habit, yes.
The reason why it does work so well for insulin resistance and prediabetes is because, again, what is insulin resistance? It's basically your cells. So we need insulin to help transport glucose into cells, right? Without it, the cells can't utilize glucose. So what happens is, people who are eating all day long, again, what happens every time you eat? You release insulin. So you release insulin. Every time you release insulin, your cells almost see insulin. They're like, oh no, you again? And they become resistant to it. It's like that friend that, that stops by every day, and you're like, oh, okay, you're coming again, versus the friend who you see once a week and you're happy to see. So it's kind of the same thing with insulin resistance. Is cells, when they don't see insulin as often, they respond to it better. So that's what you want to avoid, insulin resistance, because if you're eating all day long, your body's releasing insulin all day long, and cells don't become responsive to it. And when they don't become responsive to it, glucose stays in the bloodstream, and that's where we start getting higher glucose levels. We're not able to utilize the glucose in the cells. So we want to avoid insulin resistance by not eating all the time, and fasting does that, right? You're restricting the time of your eating, you're restricting the time of insulin release. So that's one way I would suggest for people who are insulin resistant, but pre-diabetes, kind of the same thing, right? Your body is not able to make enough insulin to meet the demand. Well, what's the demand? Are you eating too much? Are you eating too frequently? Well, let's work on that, right? So those are two things that I would really recommend. I'm actually I just wrote an article about insulin resistance. I'm going to share it on my social media too, because I think it kind of highlights why we need to really focus on restricting the time that we're eating because of that.
Absolutely. And I'll once you send me those links, I'll put both of those articles of yours in the comment section so people can gather some more wisdom around the science and details on that. So we'll absolutely share that. And I love that you also mentioned about pre-diabetes, how we can overcome that, and insulin. If it's always going to be present, we know that insulin is the #1 fat storing hormone. And then people complain that, hey, I'm not able to lose weight even if I'm doing it. Well, if you do it right, you are going to get result. But if you just keep eating frequently, which again is another, there are people who are just grazers, right? They eat all the day.
Yep.
And if we use our physiology, our nutritional biochemistry against us, you're not going to get those results. And so then we cannot blame why we are not getting results. Just do a deep dive, what we do in functional medicine, functional nutrition, understand, and just be mindful of what you're doing. And if you're not getting the results, change things up, because if you do the same things, you're not going anywhere. So I just love what we discussed today, a little bit of science, a little bit of practical information, such that people can start incorporating things and making sure things are changing, things are moving, scale is moving, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and it's not just for weight loss. I mean, you can just do it for health benefits too. But yeah, you bring up a really good point about grazing. Because of what we spoke about, grazing and eating all the time is really not good for your body. You mentioned it correctly. Insulin is a fat storing hormone. So if there's glucose that's remaining in the bloodstream because your cells aren't utilizing it because they're insulin resistant, your body doesn't know what to do with this excess glucose. So what happens is insulin stores it in the fat. So then it becomes glucose turns into fat, right?
Yes.
What we don't want. It's interesting when you were talking about that, I remembered a story about my grandfather who is deceased, but he lived to be in his mid-90s. He was a physician, and whatever, back he passed away in the 70s, but people used to ask him, like, what's your secret for living so long? And he said, I never graze. I only eat 2 or 3 meals a day. And that was his life motto. He would never graze. He would never have anything in between. And he was very healthy, up until his mid-90s. So, there's a lot of ancient wisdom, right? That
exactly.
We know more and we're more informed, but we also have to look at our ancestors and see how they lived, because there's so much ancient wisdom there.
Yes.
In our diet and what we eat and our lifestyles. So
exactly. No, I love that idea. Same thing, just like you mentioned, my father-in-law follows the same thing. He's 82, and if you look at him, you feel like he's 62.
Wow.
So, and his thing is, yes, same intermittent fasting, sunrise to sunset, and no grazing is the key to his health.
Absolutely. And it makes sense, right? Metabolically, but also just if you look at it in just a general term, it makes sense, right? You're resting your gut. You're not working your gut all the time.
Exactly. Exactly. Awesome. I'm so happy that you were able to come in and share all this clinical pearls and wisdom with our listeners. And I'll not take more of your time, but hopefully I'll catch you again on another live where we can share another insight, another topic. But thank you so much again for sharing all this with all of us.
Would love to do another one. And thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it.